After an ugly season-opening loss to the San Francisco 49ers, Jets fans are furious with the coaching staff. Is Robert Saleh already on the hot seat? Let's talk about it today. It's Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, September 11th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Let's begin. First question. John, watching Monday night's game, it was obvious the 49ers knew exactly how to attack the Jets defense. The 49ers went 2 for 8 in the red zone, so the game could have been considerably more lopsided. Halftime adjustments did little to stop the 49ers offense. Do you think this was a failure of Jets coaching or superior execution by the 49ers offense? I think that it's a combination of the two. Now, the Jets defense is not really built to fool the other team's offense. You know, in any given week, the other team's offense is going to know what the Jets run. The Jets defense is not built on deception. The Jets are really focused more on execution. They'll run the same handful of concepts over and over and over again. It's kind of a philosophical thing. Robert Saleh took it from Pete Carroll. Robert Saleh began his career in the NFL working under Pete Carroll, and Pete Carroll's not a coach who builds his defenses based on deception. He essentially runs the same handful of concepts over and over. And the reason he does it is that he wants to get his players used to executing just a simple handful of concepts. The theory behind it is that if you have like a ton of plays that you run on defense, guys are thinking about it because you're thinking, what do I need to do on this play? What do I need to do there? If this happens, what do I need to do? Whereas if you run the same stuff over and over and over, you kind of internalize your assignments. You see the same route combinations over and over. You see the same blocking schemes over and over. If you're doing the same thing consistently, eventually you just instinctually know what you need to do in any given situation. Because if you see the same route combination on the same defensive call, 20 times, eventually you just figure out you can start to play fast. So, I don't think you're ever going to see this Jets defense make a ton of adjustments. I don't think it was a schematic issue. I mean, I watched the film last night, and the Jets just executed terribly in all phases of the game. I thought their zone coverages were really sloppy. I thought Quincy Williams had a really rough game in zone coverage. I think the 49ers really targeted him in the passing game, and they hit a couple big completions against Quincy. And when you're throwing the ball against zone coverages, you're essentially trying to find a receiver who's open between the levels of defense. So the first level is the defensive line, the pass rushers. The second level are your linebackers and corners who are playing short, and the third level is your safeties, and then corners who play deep. And essentially, you have your first level, which again is between the pass rushers and the linebackers. The second level between the linebackers and the safeties, and then over the top of the safeties. The 49ers really hit the intermediate passing game very well. And it was because the Jets were not executing their zone coverages very well. So that area between the linebackers and the safeties, the 49ers had a field day there. And it was because San Francisco kept drifting a receiver out in front of the linebackers. And this happened with Quincy a bunch. And Quincy was kind of focused on that guy. Meanwhile, somebody was running behind Quincy and in front of the safeties. And they probably hit 3 passes in this area. Really sloppy zone coverage. You have to be aware in zone coverage where you are. You have to be aware of who's behind you, how far you have to drop. And in the run game, it really wasn't that complex. It just got annihilated up front. The defensive line, everybody had a bad game. There were big runs where Solomon Thomas just got pushed 5-10 yards down the line. Javon Kinlaw was awful against the run. Michael Clemens had an awful game. He got sealed multiple times. There were a couple plays where Jermaine Johnson got taken out. Jalen Holmes was bad. Quinnen Williams was quiet in this game. Quinnen Williams was not dominated to that extent, but he wasn't winning. He was kind of just holding the point of attack. The Jets just played a really lousy game. It was horrible execution on defense. And I think I'm both in terms of their coverage and in terms of how they played against the run. Now, where I would blame the coaching staff is I don't think the team was ready to play. And when you see this many mistakes, you saw it. I think you saw it on both offense and defense. I've seen some stats suggesting the offensive line wasn't that bad. I don't think I saw a lot of breakdowns on the offensive line. And with four new starters, four new starters, depending on how you view Tippmann, because Tippmann was not a week one starter last year, but he played most of the year. A bunch of new starters on the offensive line. You kind of expect there to be some breakdowns, but in the context of where it's happening across the roster, where guys are just not executing, the drop passes, Lazard coming out, Lazard who's posting monster, Lazard who's productive once the game's over, but drops that key pass on the first series. Breece Hall fumbling, Breece Hall dropping a pass, and then the defense not able to execute on any level, not able to execute their zone coverages, just getting annihilated up front. I think on some level it has to go to whether the team was prepared. And I talked about this yesterday that, look, the Jets made a big deal about how tough their training camp was. And, I went back and looked at this because I wondered after yesterday's show, was I too hard on them? No, Robert Saleh talked to the press about it. He talked about how he ran a tough training camp this year. So this wasn't me like overemphasizing it. Robert Saleh actually talked to the press about how he decided to run a tough training camp this year. But the team was not ready in any sense of the word. They weren't mentally ready. Again, lack of focus on many instances. They were not crisp in their execution. And at some point, you have to say, you know what? If this team can't execute anything, again, if it's just the offensive line that's like messing up assignments, you could say, okay, there are a bunch of new starters there. They need to get chemistry. But it's roster-wide. This team was not ready to play. How can you – I defy you. Watch that game over and tell me you saw a team that was prepared to play that game. They were not. And that goes to coaching. And I honestly think that like sometimes we focus a little too much on coaches when we assign blame because it's a players' league. But this was a game where it's week one and the team was not ready to go. The team was not prepared. And San Francisco was. And again, the Jets, especially their coaches, because Robert Saleh spoke to the media about this, so I'm not making this up. They made a big deal about how tough their training camp was. They made a big deal. We don't need to play our starters in the preseason. And I'm not saying that playing your starters in the preseason necessarily cures all the ills. But Jets made a big deal about how they prepared for the year. So I don't think it's fair for the Jets to come back and say, well, it was rusty. It was week one. We have to work out some of the issues. I don't think you could do that after you made such a big deal about how prepared your team was by training out, how your training camp got your team sharp for the season. You can't come out and say we were rusty after week one. So that's where I would fault the coaching staff. And again, like sometimes I think we blame the coaching staff too much when players don't execute. You always hear the generic thing, the coaches don't make adjustments. And, like I've heard Peyton Manning say that, halftime adjustments are really kind of a myth. You have enough time to go to the locker room and maybe grab some water to rehydrate. Halftime adjustments really don't happen all that much. And there aren't many coaching staffs that actually make adjustments. There aren't many coaching staffs that actually make good adjustments. But in this game, I think it's not a schematic thing. It's about preparation. Jets were not ready to play this game, and that's on the coaching staff. So how much should we focus on the coaching staff, and should there be consequences for that? Jets fans are angry, and you can tell that from our mailbag questions this week, a lot about Robert Saleh. One even asked, should the Jets be looking to make a coaching change right now? I'll give you my thoughts on that as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, now I've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment that you can cancel anytime. And you want to see the Jets playing the Tennessee Titans this Sunday? It's an afternoon game. If you live outside the New York area, NFL Sunday Ticket, YouTube TV is the way to guarantee you can watch it. Otherwise, you're depending on your local station. Jets enter a 4.5-point favorite according to FanDuel against the Titans. So lay $5 down on Jets, and you can watch them on YouTube and YouTube TV on NFL Sunday Ticket. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. Saleh was outcoached again, and this team is not built properly. They cannot beat the elite teams and will not go deep into the playoffs, which is the only acceptable result for this season. JD and Saleh will be gone after another middling year. My question is, would you bother firing Saleh now? I don't think there's anyone on the coaching staff who can take over. It won't change the fact that we do not have the personnel to stop the run on defense. When I fire Salah right now, that's a sign of how things went week one. The fact we're even getting this question, I mean, this was a question you get like during the Gase years. I don't see what the point of firing Salah right now would be. Look, I was pretty vocal that I did not think they should have brought Salah back this year. I thought after last season, it was time for a coaching change. I think the reason they did is fairly obvious. And I'm trying to figure out a diplomatic way to say this, but the Jets have clearly, as a franchise, decided that they are going to build everything to Aaron Rodgers' specification. That this is the team that is about Aaron Rodgers. If you fire Salah, any new coach you want to bring in is going to want the team to be about him. Any new coach is not going to want to cater to his quarterback's every win. Salah is the one coach who will buy into the idea that this is Aaron Rodgers' team completely, that Aaron Rodgers is in charge. And he's doing that because he wants to save his job. And that's not the reason I think they should have fired Salah. I think Salah did an awful job last year, and some of the stuff that came out. I mean, Salah, based on some of the reports you got from last year, Salah essentially quit on the team after Rodgers got injured. I mean, yesterday he gave a ludicrous statement to the press where he talked about how 0-1 this year is better than 1-0 last year. And yeah, I understand what he meant. I understand, you lost your quarterback last year, but to say something like that, it's just mind-boggling to me. And it's better to be 0-1. I mean, why would you say that? But his issue is not the biggest issue is not with the press. It's just what's Salah done that's shown you he's a good head coach. I don't see a whole lot. That said, I mean, I think the question kind of answered itself. If you're going to fire the coach right now, who's going to replace him? Are we going to go to Nathaniel Hackett? That's the guy that would make Rodgers happy. I mean, do we think that Nathaniel Hackett, who as bad as Salah's been, Nathaniel Hackett's in like that Adam Gase, Rich Kotite area when we're talking about how the caliber of him as a head coach. Hackett was miserable in Denver, got fired in less than one season when he was the Broncos head coach back in 2022. I mean, we're going to promote Jeff Ulbrich. I mean, I like Ulbrich. Is there anything to suggest he'd be better than Salah? I like Brant Boyer. I mean, is there anything to suggest Brant Boyer is ready to be a head coach? I don't know. But for me, if you fire Salah now, I'd ask, what was the point of bringing him back in the first place? Because if you're firing a coach after one game, that's a sign you should have fired him last year. And yeah, the Jets probably should have done it, but it would almost be a sign of like organizational dysfunction. Back in 2019, Mike McCagnon got fired. And look, Mike McCagnon deserved to be fired. But the way they did it was just like, it showed you that the organization there was no plan within the organization because they fired him after the draft. And McCagnon had run a very consequential offseason. So it showed you like the organization, the dysfunction going to the top levels of the organization, because it showed you there was no plan in place. Because why would you let a guy spend what was then a record amount of money in free agency and run a draft and then fire him? Because when you fire him, you're saying you don't think the guy knows what he's doing, yet you let him do all this stuff. It's kind of like the same thing with Salah right now. Like, you decide to bring this guy back and then you fire him after one game. What was the point of bringing him back? I don't know that there's anybody on the coaching staff who could do a better job right now as an interim coach. And look, I mean, I don't think Salah's a very good coach, but look, the entire coaching staff failed this team on Monday. I don't think there are many coaches who can look in the mirror and say that they performed well in that game. I don't think there are many coaches who can look in the mirror and say they performed well preparing the team for that game. So I don't see what the point would be right now. And yeah, look, Salah's job's on the line. He has not won in 3 years. It's very rare you get to a fourth year after 3 straight losing seasons. He's got to win now, but I don't see what the point of making a change would be. You make a change if you think you can upgrade, but not like there are a ton of standout head coaching candidates on this coaching staff right now. Next question is from Joe. John, Robert Saleh has now lost 19 games by more than 13 points. Conversely, he's only won 4 games by more than 13 points. Roughly 36% of his games have been turned off before halftime bad, and only 8% of his games have been comfortable wins. A league in which most games between even good and bad teams are somewhat competitive, isn't this proof that the coaching staff is a big part of the problem? I've sat through the Kotite and Gase era, and even they did not get blown out as consistently as this guy. I think it's a fair point. I mean, here's my problem with Salah. If somebody asked me, what are Salah's good points? I'd say, is a good defensive architect. He knows the types of players the Jets should bring in on the defensive side of the ball. He's good at communicating the skill sets that he wants at certain positions. He's got a clear philosophy on the defensive side of the ball. They've really focused on the defensive linemen. They've done a good job developing players, especially on the defensive line. Now, what's the problem with that? Those are things you'd say about a good defensive coordinator. These are not things you'd say about a guy who's a good head coach. Out of a head coach, what do I want? I want a guy who builds a top-notch staff. Salah has not done that. I want a guy who's a good game manager. Salah's not done that. I want a guy who sets high expectations for his team. Well, again, look, some of those reports last year, Salah kind of just checked out. I mean, Salah was doing research on the records of great coaches who had to play with their backup quarterbacks instead of preparing his team for trying to win. It was almost like Salah didn't believe the team could win. And look, everybody knows that expectations changed once Aaron Rodgers went down last year. And everybody knows that it was going to be a tough road ahead with Zach Wilson. But your coach's job is to try and figure out how to make the best of it, not to make excuses for his team's failure to perform. I really have become very disenchanted with Salah. And, as the question mentioned, the Jets are frequently uncompetitive in games. And that kind of speaks to, a bigger picture issue. And you wonder whether the coaching staff's setting the right expectations for this team. The team falls behind early. Is there any fight in them? Because as the question mentioned, I mean, lots of times you get games between bad teams and good teams, and the bad team's still competitive. The Jets just get blown out frequently. And I think another thing that the question points to is the issues with Salah's overall philosophy. When you get blown out a lot, but you're not blowing other teams out a lot, I think back to last year when the Jets played in Las Vegas against the Raiders on Sunday Night Football. And Salah said something very interesting. He said, this game's a race to 20. I think Salah's overall perspective is the defense is there to win the game. The offense is there to not lose the game. And that leads you to playing a lot of close games against teams you should not be playing close games against, because you're not trying to score. Your focus should be on trying to score a lot of points and preventing the other team from scoring a lot of points. I always think like Salah's dream scenario is one where he grinds out a 17-13 victory, or maybe if it's a race to 20, like a 20-13 victory. I don't think Salah really has a good mindset for offense, because if you're going to win games big, you got to score a lot of points. And Salah doesn't seem interested in scoring a lot of points. Salah seems interested in the offense, avoiding the big mistake and letting the defense win the game. That leads to a lot of close games. And the issue with playing close games is that a bad call can cost you the game. A bad bounce of the ball can cost you the game. Somebody tripping can cost you the game. There's a lot of randomness in close games. That's why one of the best ways to judge teams is how many times do they blow the opponent out? How many times do they get blown out? I just think Salah has a lot of really bad philosophies. And I think that you see them in the results the Jets get. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the defense. It was an ugly performance. And there was one player from last year's team who I think really could have made a difference. He was traded this offseason. Why did the Jets trade John Franklin Myers? And how large will his absence loom? We'll talk about that ahead here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors does everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question: can you help me understand why Joe Douglas traded John Franklin Myers? We did not clear that much cap space, and we only received a 6th-round pick in return. Franklin Myers has reportedly said the Jets did not even give him the chance to restructure. Even if Reddick had reported as planned, what did we possibly gain moving on from JFM that was worth losing our best run-defending defensive end? When I get the answer to that, I'll let you know. I'm going to say something that might be a little provocative right now. I watched that game, and I came away thinking the Jets missed JFM more than they miss Hassan Reddick. For the reason you mentioned is that this Jets defense is based on speed in the back seven, and speed typically means you're playing with smaller guys who have trouble disengaging from blocks. And having like a 4-3 type defensive end who's at 290 pounds, who can also get to the quarterback, that's a huge deal. And there just aren't many players like JFM in the league. Like JFM's not a star. He's not a Pro Bowler. He's not an All-Pro. But he's sometimes he's a unique player. He's the type of guy that allows you to run the defense the way the Jets run it. And there aren't many guys like him in the league because when you add that extra bulk on the defensive line, it allows you to play smaller and faster in the back seven because now you have 3 big guys instead of 2. Most 4-man defensive lines, you have 2 big guys. You have the 2 defensive tackles. JFM gave you a 3rd guy like that, but he also gave you a guy who could still rush the passer from the defensive end spot, which is very rare. And he's a guy, he's more of a meat and potatoes kind of guy than Reddick is. He does more of the dirty work. But, sometimes, I've heard this for years, and, I guess it reached a peak during the Leonard Williams era because Leonard Williams talked about hidden production. And people act like the only way you're a good player is if you put up big stats. The game of football, a lot of value is produced from guys who don't necessarily put up big stats. Just because something doesn't appear on the stat sheet does not make it unimportant. Sometimes you need guys to do the dirty work, and that dirty work is very valuable. And JFM did a lot of it. Maybe he wasn't a 10-sack guy, but he was a guy who produced a lot of pressures and helped clog the running lanes. Why did they do it? I still don't know. I mean, there were reports, like some of the beat writers who said they did it for salary cap reasons, but as you mentioned, JFM was not reproached to redo his deal. They didn't even know. So I think there were other ways to get under the salary cap than trading JFM. And he was a really important player. The other thing you wonder is okay, well, how was he in the locker room? Everybody says he was great in the locker room. He was a beloved figure in the locker room. The coaches loved him. The players loved him. Baffling to see. I think that's one of the biggest unforced errors the Jets made this offseason. I was the number one re-signed Bryce Huff fan. I was very vocal that I thought they should have re-signed Bryce Huff. But you know what? You can find other pass rushers. They brought in Reddick. Even without Reddick, I mean, I think there are ways they'll be able to manufacture a pass rush. The Jets can blitz more. Robert Saleh, through his career, has kind of adjusted his pass rush to the talent he had. In 2020, the 49ers had a lot of injuries. Salah blitzed a lot. In 2021, the Jets lost Carl Lawson. They didn't really have any good pass rushers. They blitzed a lot. 2022, 2023, when the Jets had good pass rushers on the defensive line, they blitzed less. Salah has shown some flexibility in terms of how much he blitzes. And with the corners the Jets have, with Sauce and DJ and Carter, they can blitz because they have corners who will hold up one-on-one. That's the biggest risk when you blitz, is that you're leaving your corners on an island one-on-one. Jets have corners who are going to hold up fine if they blitz. So even without Reddick, now you're better off with Reddick here, and Reddick's insurance against one of those corners getting injured. One of the corners get injured, you have Reddick there, you can lean more into the pass rush. That's what the Jets did last year when Sauce and DJ got hurt. They leaned on the pass rush. They played backup corners and still played well defensively because their pass rush was home. Without Reddick, you can lean more on the corners. So I feel like, look, Reddick's a big deal, and getting him back would certainly help the team. But I feel like JFM was the more important player because there isn't really a way to replace JFM the way there is. I mean, you're better with Reddick. Look, I'd rather have Reddick rushing the passer than needing to blitz more, but there's at least a plausible path to replacing a lot of Reddick's production. I still don't know what the Jets are going to. That's why I said yesterday, on the game recap show I did yesterday, I mentioned that, week one frequently brings over reactions. Everybody's talking. The Jets aren't on the San Francisco level. The Jets aren't really contenders. We don't know that yet. It may be true. It may prove to be true, but it could just be a bad game. The area where I'm really worried is the defensive line, because that defensive line, I begin the season and I say, okay, this is the best case scenario. This is the worst case scenario. I say it at every position group. That defensive line performance confirmed every one of my fears. Everything I was worried about was magnified in that game. I'm very concerned about this defensive line, and JFM not being here is a big part of it. I have no idea why they traded him. That trade made no sense to me at the time. And, I don't know what they're going to do, because there's not there's a John Franklin Myers just floating out there at the moment. I'm still baffled by that move. I thought it was a really questionable move at the time, and everything we saw week one confirmed that. Our last question, trying to figure out how our defense could have played so poorly against both the run and the pass. Manhandled at the line of scrimmage and always seeming to be 5 yards off the ball in coverage. Thoughts? Yeah, sometimes it's simple. Sometimes there are times where there's an issue that's schematic, that's very subtle. We're talking about the Jets' run defense. The Jets just got annihilated up front. That defensive line, I mean, you just saw guys getting moved 5 yards up the field, and especially the defensive tackle spot. I mean, this defensive tackle position is as much as losing JFM is concerned for me. The defensive tackle spot, those defensive tackles played awful. Quinton Williams had a bad game, but Quinton, we can count on to bounce back. Kinlaw, we were looking for a big breakout year. Kinlaw had a couple decent pass rush reps, but man, he was bad against the run. Solomon Thomas is Solomon Thomas. He's just not a very good player. He's a great guy in the locker room. He's just not a very good player. And the defensive ends, again, Clemens, there were a number of runs where Clemens got sealed. Jermaine had a couple Jermaine had a bad game. Jermaine, I think, will bounce back, but Clemens did not do the job. If there was one guy I could see theoretically replacing JFM, it was Clemens. Well, not based on week one. He has the build to maybe be a JFM type of guy, but nowhere near as effective week one. That was the plan. It's not looking so good. And then, as I mentioned, the Jets just could not execute coverage concepts. I mentioned this earlier. They were just playing sloppy zone coverage. That's got to improve. That I feel comfortable will improve. I feel like the Jets will get better. The more game reps they get, but I feel like the zone will be fixed in coverage. The front, though, I got major concerns about the Jets' ability to stop the run. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.